Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast, sponsored by Infopro Learning. As always, I'm your host, Nolan Hout. Joining me today, we have a very special guest, Stella Collins, known as the Brain Lady, for her pioneering work in applying neuroscience to learning and development. This topic of neuroscience and learning is always a fascinating one for me, so I'm so excited to have Stella on. She has over 25 years of experience in this field, training professionals worldwide. She's the author of a best-selling book called Neuroscience for Learning and Development. She's taught over 50,000 people on LinkedIn Learning. Today, we're going to talk with Stella a little bit about a lot of things, but it's all going to be centered around this idea of elevating learning and amplifying impact. And to help us to amplify that impact, let's actually meet Stella. Stella, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to meet you, Nolan.
Likewise, and thanks for joining later in your day, because so we're on different, probably completely different time zones. So Stella, thanks again for joining. How we always start this, Stella, is learning a little bit more about how you got into this field in the first place. You're a best-selling author. You've taught 50,000 people. You're widely, known as a subject matter expertise and learning. But where did you start? Where did this flame that has been burning for the past 25 years, where was the kindling?
The kindling was probably when I was a kid, that my parents were teachers, and I swore I would never be a teacher. Having said that, I did a psychology degree, I did a master's in human communication, and I became really interested in the brain. So my kind of final year project in my degree was about the brain.
Okay.
And then I worked in IT for many years, so I coded and was, typical sort of IT person, and then took on a role that was IT support and training manager. And I thought, great, I can do the IT support management bit, no problem. Learning manager, training manager, no idea. Took on a very inspirational young woman who kept saying to me, Stella, you'd be good at this, you'd like this. It's psychology in action, it's psychology in motion. And that kind of inspired me. I got really interested in the brain and learning. I went to a conference. It was an HR conference. There were lots of people in great suits, and there was a pirate ship. I spoke to the pirate ship, and they were teaching finance training, but using a really different kind of methodology, really using a much more brain-friendly methodology. So I kind of joined up with them. I ran away from home, joined a pirate ship, not literally, and then have been in learning and development ever since, and just keep on evolving, my knowledge about the brain, but also it's very much around the practical application of, what can we take from neuroscience and psychology, so all the kind of brain sciences, and make learning better. And it's a passion to make sure that when people are learning at work, that they're able to get impact from it, they're able to get results from it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The neuroscience has always been, and like the psychological factor has always been really interesting to me. My degree is in marketing, but I always found a lot of the interesting components more the psychology. Like a lot of our professors actually had that background, and helping you understand, when you say this, why do people resonate with it? Like what actually makes it stick to them? There's a reason that they say, Miller, you got the time, we've got the beer kind of stuff. And so I've always found it fascinating that it's that same principle, as I started in my learning career, it's that same kind of principle of the more you actually understand the psychological component of why you're doing, of the way that you say it and the why that you design your instruction, has a big impact. And the more you understand the core tenets of it, the better you can do in your job. So speaking of that, let's start with like that very conceptual idea of how do our brains and bodies really learn?
So it's all down to neuroplasticity. It's down to the fact that our brains naturally develop new connections. And I think the easiest way to describe it is if I ask you, how did you learn to ride a bike? Tell me how you learned to ride a bike.
I think my dad pushed me. and I fell like 4 or 5 times. And then one time he pushed me and I didn't fall. And that's what I did.
So that's really how we learn most things. We learn them by A, we want to do it. We want to write, right?
True.
B, we get some guidance. Your dad pushes you or your dad helps you. You ride a small boat, kind of a structured environment. You're doing it in your backyard rather than, on the highway. And then you kind of start experimenting for yourself. You let go, you fall off a few times. And then eventually, you kind of get it. And because you keep repeating it, then you learn it. You've learned to do it. Now you've learned to do it at a very basic level at the age of 4 or 5, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But then as you go through your life, you learn to ride, bigger bikes, better bikes, faster, different types of bikes. So you keep mastering that skill. And that's how we learn all skills. And one of the things I've done one of the things I think is really useful in terms of learning is to have a process that helps people remember what are the stages of learning. So that's where I kind of came up with the G.E.A.R model, which very much represents that story. It's, first of all, think about what's the end result. The end result is you want to be riding a bike or able to code or, have an in-depth conversation with somebody or sell them a product, whatever it is. Think about what's the end result. Keep people motivated because learning is quite hard work. It's effortful. It uses brain energy. It uses body energy. And give people some guidance at the first part. So that's the G of G.E.A.R. Give them some guidance. Allow them to experiment. The E, get them to experiment. Just fall off, get some feedback.
Yeah.
Then they need to apply it in the real world. So if you're riding a bike, you need to eventually get onto the road. If you're learning to sell a product, you need to go and try it with a potential client. So you need to do that application. That also requires support. It requires certain organizational context. It needs the environment to be right. You need the opportunity to do it. And the final piece of that G.E.A.R is the retention piece, which is how do you help people remember information for the long term? But how do you help people go from, kind of small, wobbly, I'm just riding my bike, or I'm selling to the client, but I'm following the script, to turning it into your natural dialogue, your natural way of behaving, your, turning it effectively into a habit, embedding it. And that involves, huge amounts of practice, repetition, and just making sure that it goes from kind of being difficult to do, cognitively demanding prefrontal cortex work into something that's more habitual and has kind of become, more of a habit or a learned behavior.
Yeah, so I mean that's a really simple model. It's the the G.E.A.R, G.E.A.R model, and so we've got G for guide, E for experiment, A for apply, and then R for retain. A really simple model. Now you were talking about it a lot in this context of like riding a bike. You mentioned programming, coding. As a lot of the world is shifting more to skills, and versus the job. My job is coding versus my skill is I'm a logical thinker or whatever it is. Are you seeing a similar application being applied for how people can acquire a skill versus a specific job, and especially like maybe even those softer skills?
Yeah, absolutely. It's how we learn pretty much everything. Whether you're talking about skills or whether you're talking about the full job. A job is a set of skills that you string together in different ways in order to be able to do your job. It's the skills that matter. And I think, learning to do particular tasks can teach you how to do the skills. But whatever you're doing, you have to go through this process of, I can't quite do it. I'm practicing doing it. I'm getting better at it. Bless you. And I'm now kind of mastering that ability to be able to do it and feel confident in doing it. I think that's one of the other important things. That's why the motivation is important, that you feel you want to do it and that you can do it confidently and competently. And
So,
once you can do that, you sort of you stop seeing it as a skill, you just see it as something you do.
yeah. So help me understand that. I mean, this is sounds great and good, and this is how people learn. But how do people get it wrong? Like, not necessarily how do people implement the G.E.A.R model wrong, but when they're designing learning programs, and you do a lot of consulting work, right? You've worked with really large organizations helping design fairly complex learning programs. When you're coming in and doing this work, where do you see the common missteps in learning? Like what are they missing? And if you happen to know, like, what is the science behind what they're doing that makes it not maybe the ideal situation for learning?
Oh, that's a really interesting meta question. Where are we getting it wrong? We're not starting in the right place.
Okay.
We're, L&D are often, and I'm working with a client at the moment where L&D are very well-meaning, but they're creating courses because they think people need them. They're not asking the question, what does the business need? They are moving towards that. They're starting to ask the question, what does the business need in order for people in the business to, thrive in their own careers, but also to, keep that business going, to make it a profitable, valuable, useful organization. So we don't start in the right place. We tend to measure, did people enjoy the training, and did they turn up? Neither of which actually tell you whether they've actually applied the skills back in the workplace.
Yeah.
Still, organizations really focus on content. They have, there is so much content in the world, and that's great. We need some information to guide us. Most organizations do the guide. They work hard on the motivation. They quite often do the experiments. So if you're doing workshops or if you're doing AI simulations or something like that, that's definitely the experiment part. But the piece where organizations struggle is the application, the helping people actually take it into the workplace. The person who has the most impact on whether you actually apply your skills, your new wobbly skills, is your manager. Are managers supporting that? Do managers have time? Are managers empowered to do it? Are they trained and helped to do it? And then there's also the retention piece, because often, and I see it with many, many organizations, training is a one-off event where you go, somebody tells you something and you're expected to be able to not only remember it, but to actually apply that as a skill. So I think it's the taking people on a full journey is where things fall apart.
Yeah, I like the context you applied to applying it to the business. 'Cause I think a lot of times and it's a component of it is what is the business metric that you're trying to do, right? But I think you also nailed on, like, well, what is the culture of learning that skill or acquiring that skill? And a lot of that drives from the manager. And like, so understanding the business world and ecosystem that you operate in is really important. Like, I'm like thinking back, if we stick with the bike riding analogy, if I took a course, and maybe my dad was there the very first day and he pushed me, one time, he's like, all right, I'm going to guide you once, but then I've got 50 other kids. I got to go help all these 50 other kids. Now I will eventually learn. I would, but I would have a lot more Band-Aids. More Band-Aids. And so I think part of what you're, recommending is that if you take all these things into context, try to remove some of those Band-Aids, try to remove some of those falls, get them on the bike. You can get them on the bike a lot faster if one, the context is, yes, we need to ride the bike. So cool. We have the business, reasoning, but do we understand the world that they're operating in is so important. It makes a lot of sense to me. I can see how that has a big impact.
It's not just, can I ride a bike? It's, why am I riding a bike?
Why am I riding the bike?
I'm riding a bike because I want to get to school, or I want to be able to cycle to work, or it's that bigger picture why. And that really helps people get their motivation. If people come to training because they were sent, and it still happens, they're not going to learn very much. Their bodies may be there, their minds are probably not there. They're not really taking things in, and they're certainly not going to practice afterwards, where there is a risk of failure. And if failure is not tolerated within the organization, they're not going to practice, because if they're seen to fail and they get shouted at or punished, they're not going to do it. Culture in which you're trying to learn is hugely important. And, organizations work very hard to build a good learning culture, but you've only got to have a pocket of, one team or one manager who has a different view on it. And that can really start to sort of eat away at the great culture you had. Suddenly there's a bad bit that maybe needs not cutting out, but and sorting them out.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. I was just talking, so Dr. Carl Kopp, he, has done a lot in the gamification world, and he has this new book came out called Action First Learning. And I was chatting with them about it with this idea of how do you tell them why you need to know to ride a bike, right? They're like, he's like, the age old thing is you start with, why is this important for me? And he's like, and it's right, you need to do that, but the lens in which you tell people is important. And if you can, the people that don't know how to ride a bike, sure, that, just telling them why is big, but the people that have been riding their bike for years, that's not going to be doing much for them. It's, you got to help them actually engage and uncover their why early on. I thought that was a really interesting perspective as we kind of graduate from the, knowing the business context and explaining that first.
But I think also what's important there is understanding the stage of learning your people are at. When people are new to something, you've never ridden a bike before, you need a lot more scaffolding, a lot more structuring.
Yeah.
If you're building on the skills you already have knowledge, you have experience, and that needs less structuring. Actually allows people, what works better there is to really expand on the kind of the experimenting bit, letting them test and use their own common sense knowledge that they've already got. So, the context of the individual learner is also important. And I would say that even telling a new learner why you want to do it, yes, that might give them some information, but unless they can find their own why,
yeah,
it's wrong.
Yeah, and that's kind of what that point is help people uncover that why,
Yeah.
With some scaffolding. One of the things that I've been wanting to talk about, a big component that ties into all of this is this idea of AI. You mentioned managers and not having time. AI obviously is a really good way on the apply phase, or maybe the experiment phase actually is maybe the better one. Experiment is to, a lot of what we're doing now is creating a customer agent that acts exactly like the customer of our people and say, hey, if you want to practice, you can go use that. It helps take a little bit of that burden away from the manager because they don't have to be there all the time. Maybe it's not as good as, the real manager, hopefully not, but, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it is. But it helps. How are you seeing AI apply, amplify, support what this G.E.A.R model is doing?
So I think you're really right. I think the AI can amplify. If you've elevated the learning in the first place and you've got the right strategy going, then the AI can really amplify. So it can amplify across everything. So it can really help you analyze what the problems are in the first place. What's the biggest problem we face around here? Do we need to be training people to, to do leadership, or do we need to train people to, I don't know, clean the bathroom? It could be anything. Biggest business challenge, you can start to use AI to analyze that data that's out there. I think that's really important. Certainly it gets used in terms of the guide part, building content and making content. Now you can build content really fast. It can be really relevant because it's so quick. You can adapt it to, there's been a change in the business. There's been a change in context. We can adapt that quickly. And also, as you say, you've got that opportunity to have learners practice with AI. So I think that's really the experiment part. But that can also still feed them guided information as they're experimenting. So long as the AI is sort of knowledgeable enough in the right area to be able to do that, then it's really helpful. I think it can also help in the application piece. There's a tool in Australia, but it's used globally. Lever Learning Coach M, and they use an AI tool to support people in the workplace, and it effectively coaches them, to apply what they're learning. Really helps if you've got a manager who's supporting as well. But this is a really good addition, an amplification of that. And then in terms of repetition, the kind of the retention piece, AI again, you can use it to do spaced learning. It can check whether you're genuinely learning, whether you're just making guesses. So AI can be used in so many different places. And then again, measuring, evaluating, you can collect so much more data now, and then you can use AI to help you analyze that data.
Yeah, I think on that, application retention is a huge one. I was chatting with somebody. We have a leadership coach. We have a whole series of leadership programs at Infopro Learning, but one of the big things that we're doing is understanding how we do provide a more cost-effective like retention and application, even because when you have the classic sage on a stage learning, you come in, you bring everybody in, and you say, "We're going to teach you communication skills." That's maybe not the best one, but it made me conflict resolution, right? Okay, conflict resolution. You're going to learn how to do that. Now, you can't really control what conflict comes up in the workplace and when it comes up in the workplace, and it comes a year later. Okay, great. What percentage is this employee remembering of their conflict resolution? Class, most to zero. But if we take that program and we feed it into the agent, and then the employee goes to this agent and says, "Hey, I have conflict with this employee. I don't really know what to do." It acts almost as a application and retention. It's the A and the R because it's helping you apply it, but then it's also that it is that retention that you need to then go back and apply it. So I think there's a lot of cool things. And then one of the big things that you talked about was and I wanted to pick your brain a little bit on it, is you said how these like synapses are formed. And a lot of times when we're developing skills for people, it's rare that everybody starts at the same level. Yeah. And so you're kind of so therefore their synapses have been formed at different levels, and this is where I think AI can be a little bit tricky because it can be really helpful because you can design many versions of a program depending on whether they're an expert, mid-tier, or novice. In the past, to think about creating 3 different programs would have been an absolute terror. But then, now being able to just make some tweaks along the way is really good. But I was listening to a podcast with Werner Herzog, who's a actor, famous actor. And he was saying the way that kids are using AI today, he's like, when I was in school, I first had to learn the square root of 81. How to do the square root of 81. And I know it's 9. I hope that's accurate for those math people. But he's like, and then I figured out how to use my calculator. But I knew, so I knew what it was, and I knew what I was trying to do, and I knew how to do it. But then obviously I got a calculator, and now I never have to actually do it out on paper. And so he was, kind of saying that for the people that don't know, we're doing a big disservice by actually giving them these AI tools immediately and saying, go do this. This tool will help you identify the square root of 81, where you don't even know what square root means, yeah. Right? And so I was thinking a lot about it, especially with somebody like you who's done so much research in this field. So I more want to ask the question from you for others in your field, especially those, and how we're bringing up the next group of L&D, professionals. What advice do you have on how they can, develop their skills, but also leverage some of the power of AI? I know that's a very long question, so I hope I've kept you with me the whole time.
I absolutely totally understand the question, because I actually posted on LinkedIn about it yesterday or the day before. Because it's a question that I think everybody's asking, and I'm not sure there's any clear answers yet, because we know already that if you make it really easy for people to find information, they'll find it, and therefore they won't learn it. They just find it. Mm-hmm. The challenge around AI is things like, if AI's rubbish at maths, it could tell you the square root of 81 was 7, and if you have no concept of what it is, you just have to accept that AI's done that. And I don't really know what the answer to this is. I think there is something around helping people develop critical thinking as a skill. But unless you have some information to compare against, critical thinking doesn't really work, because you don't know what to compare it with. So I suspect we will work it out. I'm not sure there is an answer yet. I think, apprenticeships and things like that are a really good way to learn to build
that's a
basic
great
skills.
point. Yeah.
But there's many roles, particularly, kind of cognitive roles are the ones now that it's harder to build, because we're enabling AI, we're giving AI, we're deputizing AI to do some of that work for us, which means we're not building the information. So my long answer to your long question is I'm not entirely sure. I think it's something we really need to think about addressing. My optimistic answer is we'll find a way and we'll get around it, because I had exactly the same thing as Werner Herzog, and I use that example quite a lot, to calculate. Young people never have calculators anymore, and they still seem to be able to manage to function in the world. So I think the way the world functions and what we have to do with our jobs may change so much that maybe that basic knowledge doesn't matter anymore, is my answer.
Yeah, my brother said something to me once, and it was just in a conversation. He said, he's like, the way that my brain seems to work, and he knows nothing about the science, is he goes, if I know I can get the answer within a couple seconds on Google, I never think to remember it.
Yeah.
Because the ability to get to the answer was so quick that I feel like my brain is determined, like you said, just like what you said, if you can find the answer, you don't learn. If you can find it without having to apply your brain, then you're going to do it. Yeah. Because humans are like any other species. Our number one goal is to conserve energy, because we want to survive as long as we can, right? And maybe procreate, but that's that's for a separate podcast, maybe. Just one piece of advice I can give to those that are leveraging AI. I had a really interesting experience the other day trying to get AI to build a table for me with data. And there was one column that I wanted to change. I had gone through all the work, and then at the end I was like, oh, I made a mistake very early on. I need to just change the column. And it could not figure it out. It just had a fit, because it would not unlearn what I told it in that moment. And it kind of wants to update everything or nothing. And so I ended up asking, why is it that you're making this mistake? And I got into this whole thing. So I ended up learning a lot more about AI on the engineering side than I ever cared to know. But actually that then made me better at my job. So my one piece of advice to you, if you're using AI and maybe you don't know what a square root is, but you ask it the square root, once it gives you the answer, just ask, how did you come up with that answer?
Yeah.
Can you help me understand how you came up with that answer? Just that one question will help you understand. It will tell you, because it will give you the logic. It will say, this is exactly what I did. I know this is this, and then allow yourself to just remain curious. A couple of gentlemen, one of them was Simon Brown. I can't remember the other, who's now at EY, but they wrote this book, The Curious Advantage. I don't know if you remember the name of the book.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it was just all about the context was, if you build a culture of curiosity, everybody will continue to learn. So that's just my 2 cents on that. So Stella,
really valuable piece of advice, and I think the thing you have to keep remembering is that AI might be able to explain the logic to you, but AI has, in that sense, LLMs have no logic. They are literally stringing together that seem the most likely. So they do not understand square roots at all. They just make it sound good. That's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stella, what's next on you? What I know, that a lot of people that write a book tend to want to write another book. I know that a lot of where you spend a lot of your time today is consulting with L&D organizations. Obviously, if you're listening and you care to if you're looking for some help, definitely reach out to Stella. She's on LinkedIn. But what's new for you? Are you writing anything new? Are you coming out with any new research?
So I'm definitely writing a new book, and in fact, I would really urge people to get in touch with me, because I actually want case studies from companies. So the new book is it's a bit of a sneaky entrance. It's called The Learning Organization.
Okay.
And it's about kind of how do we create a self-directed learning environment? How do we support a self-directed environment within the workplace? Because most organizations are aware that, just having kind of information delivered by L&D, or this kind of very matriarchal kind of school academic form of, comes from L&D, is nowhere near as effective as actually having people curiosity, being curious and finding out for themselves. And humans are good at that. We're naturally good at it. However, we also make a lot of mistakes, and we take a long time, like you talked about, riding the bike. You could do it on your own and you get there, but you'll have more mistakes and it'll take you longer. If you understand how learning works as a learner yourself, you're more likely to get there quicker. Nobody ever, well, I'm sure people learn to play tennis, play the guitar without ever having any lessons. But you can really accelerate the process by having somebody explain the process. So I think, the book I really wanted to write was, kind of a self-help learning book. But my publisher wasn't interested in that. So the book I'm writing, and I think it's almost contradictory, is how do you create an environment in which self-help learning can happen, self-directed learning can happen. So I am looking for people who've got, great stories about that they can share of what they've done in their organization, or maybe what they've experienced for themselves, because I want to have, practical, real stories and real voices in the book, as well as some neuroscience and evidence and research behind it.
Lovely. Well, listeners, reach out to Stella. She's on LinkedIn. Again, to search for Stella Collins. You can also look for The Brain Lady. And she's written best-selling books, so I'm sure you'll find her. And we'll put some information in the comments so that people can find that. Well, Stella, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a remarkable session. Again, I appreciate you staying up. It's later hours for you.
Not that late here.
Okay. And where I think you're in. Where are you? I thought you were in the Germany area, but maybe I'm wrong.
I'm in
Belgium. Okay. Belgium. Okay. Right.
Between France and
yeah. Right there. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Stella. I appreciate it. We look forward to maybe catching up with you again. Once that book comes out, we have to have you back on.
Thank you very much, Nolan. And thank you for listening, everybody.
Thanks.